Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. This is Simon He from Learn BNB and James Svetec from Learn BNB as well. And James is doing a really interesting project in short-term rentals and with Airbnb that we'd love to tell you about right now. And he's doing this with his new business partner for that project, Riley here. We're going to dive into their entire process, how they found their deal, what their strategy is, and the whole process of acquiring the property, renovating it, and then furnishing and stabilizing the asset in terms of getting the listing up and getting it, performing really well and getting bookings right away. So we're going to dive into this whole thing right now. Riley, James, welcome. So let's kick this off. Like, what was the genesis for this idea? How did you guys first come up with like, hey, let's go find this kind of property right now to do this specific project? And we'll get into more about the specifics of the project, but what was the genesis for this?
Yeah, I can feel that one. I think like the for years now I've been in the Airbnb space and been really interested in short-term rentals, been kind of mastering short-term rentals from a management perspective, but still hadn't pulled the trigger on actually owning a property, investing in one. And then got connected with Riley. I've known Riley for a number of years, but got kind of reconnected with him relatively recently. And Riley being a full-time real estate investor and me being an Airbnb expert, it just kind of naturally happened over time. And it was actually Riley who first started being interested in the cottage space. And I was kind of talking about the experience I had with cottage country really booming right now. I think Riley can speak to as well, like why we wanted to get into the property specifically that we did, and why there's like why we saw that as just a really great opportunity right now.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. Riley, what was your background before you started looking into cottages and Airbnbs?
Yeah, my background was actually in property management. So for quite a few years, I managed a decently large portfolio, over 100 units in southwestern Ontario, and that was my full-time job. So I like to say that was my foot in the door into real estate, and actually the owner of this entire portfolio was my mentor as well. So he taught me everything from lead generation to the renovations to the actual property management itself to the bookkeeping, and I was really grateful to kind of be in that environment there for the good part of 2 years. And through working with him and actually seeing what it takes to find off market leads and actually close on them off market too, along with like the renovation and the property management, I actually started to buy up my own portfolio. So I started to buy 2, 3, 4 unit buildings. So kind of like the multifamily residential.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think it was a good investment to go into single families at all back then, because like the numbers just don't usually make sense when you're looking at a price per unit kind of perspective, where it's one unit basically as a single family home. It just
Yep.
didn't make sense. But that was kind of my background, was just 2 to 4 units. And then yeah, I started like James mentioned here, kind of getting connected with him around just what an Airbnb investment could look like, especially in like cottage country. And yeah, like that's kind of led to what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So cottages, I'm not super familiar. Are they kind of like they're basically like a big house kind of away from the city, usually with multiple units. And maybe like they operate sort of like some of them operate bread and breakfast. Uh and there's a owner operator who's usually there. Is that how it normally works, or?
Not quite. So a cottage would be like would be just a vacation home essentially. It's someone's
Mm,
vacation home that typically if it's a cottage, it's going to be like a couple hours outside of where they aside from where they live. Just
yeah.
like you said, out in the country. So like in the area that we're investing in north of Toronto, it's a lot of people in Toronto that like live in Toronto or in the greater Toronto area, and they're in this densely populated metropolitan area and they want a place out by the lake basically. So they'll have
Mm,
boats at the lake. They'll spend a lot of their summertime up at the lake at their cottage, and it's just basically it's just a vacation home. And so you see like that's a pretty popular concept in a lot of like kind of the Ontario region, as well as like New York State. It tends to be a lot of people have like a cottage in the Poconos, or in upstate New York. And then it's a similar kind of investing strategy and a similar overall deal as buying there's a lot of properties around national parks that do quite well for reasons. The attraction is kind of the same, where it's just an attraction to get away from the city, get out of the hustle and bustle. And so it's a single family home. Just someone's vacation home essentially is what it would traditionally be used for. And then if you're putting it on rental, it's just basically for the people that don't own a cottage. It's a chance to get out of the city, relax, be ideally by the lake or by some attraction like a national park. And just have some more space to kind of get outside and some really cool amenities like maybe a hot tub, sauna, that kind of thing.
And this is like, how far is this from the city? Like we're talking like an hour or 2 hours?
2 hour drive. Yeah.
2 hour drive. Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's sort of like a pretty much like where people might think of as for a weekend getaway.
Exactly.
Still very accessible, driving distance. They're not spending 5-6 hours on the road or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. I guess kind of a parallel for people in like LA, it would be like somewhere inland, like Temecula's for a wine country, about a couple hours away. And there's these big vacation homes for people can rent. And then if people are in the Bay Area, it might be like in Sonoma or Napa, a little bit further in wine country, where people can go for like something like that. Okay, and is this an area that you guys were sort of familiar with before the pandemic, or did you guys kind of notice that more as the pandemic happened and people were trying to get away from the city?
Yeah, so there's always been a draw to these types of areas. Like it's pretty similar to like, you mentioned like Sonoma or Napa. There was already a big draw to it before the pandemic. And similarly, there was always a big draw. And honestly, the investment numbers still made a lot of sense before the pandemic. Like we actually based our whole analysis for this recent acquisition we made purely on 2018 and 2019 numbers, just because 2020 was so heavily inflated that we didn't want to be basing our analysis on those inflated numbers. So the investment opportunity has always been there. It's definitely been kind of accelerated by COVID, because a lot of these more getaway areas, you're seeing like a lot of areas around national parks, a lot of areas like within 2 to 3 hours of a major city where it's a good kind of weekend getaway. Those have become very popular as people can't travel internationally, but still want to get away somewhere and don't want to get on a flight to do it. So yeah, it definitely kind of piqued our interest more with the pandemic and everything going on, but always kind of had seen it as a good opportunity even before all the pandemic craziness.
Yeah, and I like the distinction you made of looking at the pre-pandemic numbers, and a lot of people, because there were a lot of Airbnb units that became available, and people are looking at going in, and they're only looking at what's going on in 2020, and it's probably the case that a lot of the demand that's spread out to these new areas, some of it's going to stay, but it's probably not going to stay at the same 2020 levels, and probably drop a little bit. So I think that's the conservative, prudent way to do that. So when you guys were looking at this market, did you explore other markets? How did you, choose this one over the other ones, and felt that this was better?
Yeah, I can kind of jump in there. The interesting thing about this area in particular is it actually has like access to like another major city, which is called Peterborough. And so because it's close to that city, then when we're doing like the renovation, for example, or if we're doing like the hosting with the cleaners or whatnot, there's a lot of people that still live in that city, and it's only a half an hour away. And so we really wanted to be close to a nearby city that could supply like the workers for the management, the workers for the renovation. Because if you go too far rural, then and you're not actually close to like a neighboring city, then you're paying additional money when it comes to the cleaners, additional money when it comes to the contractors to do the renovation, and so that was the main reason as to why we chose this city. But there's obviously other cities as well across Canada that would reflect kind of the similar location as to what we had chosen here, being in the Kawartha Lakes. But there were other options that we had looked at, but this one made the most sense.
So when you're factoring the costs of acquiring, renovating, and then operating it, I think a lot of folks kind of sometimes don't look at the operating side of it enough. And then you're looking at the revenue potential. This sort of gave you the best ROI, looking at some other places where your costs are going to be more, your operating costs, hiring cleaners was going to be more expensive. So that combination made sense for you guys, right?
Yeah. And there was
Cool.
also like a really interesting arbitrage opportunity with this property where, like, for a number of reasons, it was undervalued compared to what we were able to get income wise. Like, so if you look at, there's another area that's quite popular north of Toronto called Muskoka. And it's not inherently nicer than Kawartha Lakes. Like, there are some nicer lakes up there, but for someone that's going away to an Airbnb, they're not really concerned with the size of the lake and the niceness of the lake, the same way that someone buying a cottage or buying a property on the lake is. Typically, a really large lake tends to be more desirable because you can go boating and you can go and there's like tons of room to do your water sports. And ideally, you'd be connected to like the waterway that connects all these different lakes, so you can go and do like a little boat tour on the weekend. But an Airbnb guest isn't going to be doing that. So if you're paying a premium to go and get a property in Muskoka, you're not really going to see oftentimes an equivalent return on how much more someone's going to be willing to pay for that property, because a lot of the things that are contributing to the value of the property in, say, Muskoka are not inherently valuable to a guest on Airbnb. So you end up just paying a premium and getting something that's nice for a certain buyer, but not actually valuable to that Airbnb guest.
Yeah, no, this is something that we've seen a lot in terms of the inquiries from our readers to the blog and some of our students, where they may think that I need to have all these amenities. They either go acquire a property that has it, or they spend a lot of money paying for something that maybe their audience, the people that want to visit and vacation in the area, they don't really care about. They don't even notice, you know? Yeah. So that's really interesting. So there was a price disparity between these assets, but in terms of the revenue potential, they were relatively similar. And from the perspective of the potential guest, they wouldn't notice any difference there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So once you decided on this market and you spotted this underpriced, essentially undervalued property, how did what was the process like in terms of making a bid and ultimately acquiring it?
Yeah, it was interesting actually. So there were a few indications right off the beginning, like James had mentioned, like the arbitrage opportunity with the property that stood out to us. And then the one in particular that stood out to us as well was that the property was actually listed on the MLS for over 90 days. And typically when something's listed for that long, it raises a red flag in the eyes of like investors, because they're like, okay, well, what's going on here? I wonder if there's an opportunity to come in and maybe offer a bit less. And so the property checked all the boxes that we were looking for up until that point. It had a lot of deferred maintenance that had to be completed on the property. So we were looking at the potential for what we call the BRRRR strategy. So being able to refinance it within the year, due to being able to like fix it up and make it look nicer, and therefore it's worth more. So that's kind of a few more kind of check boxes that we had for the analysis. When it came down to the offering, though, we were able to really lean on that deferred maintenance along with just simply how long it was listed for, because the sellers were in the position of really wanting to get rid of the property quickly. They had some unpaid, like some debt, that they had incurred, and they just wanted to get rid of it. So they had already moved into a condo, and they were just hoping that they could get rid of the property as soon as possible. But now they actually have to pay for the mortgage still and the utilities, and so they were bleeding out quite heavily.
So they were quite motivated.
They were extremely motivated. So long story short, in the negotiation process, it took about a week and a half to 2 weeks. We were back and forth with them a few times. And I think originally it was at, correct me if I'm wrong, James, but I think it was at like 670 or around that point, right? Yeah. And then we got them down just on one simple phone call for an hour, down to 570. So we had about $100,000 drop. And then after the renovation, we ended up buying it for $520,000
after the inspection.
So, after the inspection, sorry, yes.
And what did that was quite a ROI on that phone call. Did you guys do any kind of special preparation in terms of like, hey, we're gonna really push on this and push on this, or it was pretty obvious? It was also related to that was were you aware of any other buyers at the time, potential bidders, competitors?
Yeah. So especially in the market that we're in right now, it's so difficult if there are other offers on the table. People are very excited, to go out and actually buy properties and kind of overpay is what I'm seeing a lot of on the
Yep.
market. So we buy a lot of the properties that we do this type of strategy with off the market for that reason. But once in a while, you can still find that really great rockstar deal on the market, which this ended up kind of being. In
Yep.
the negotiation process, one of the biggest things that we use is called we refer to it as their hot button. So if you can identify their hot button, that's kind of the reason for selling, and it's the urgency piece. So when you can
Mhm.
identify the reason for selling and it's that hot button, and you can continue pressing that button throughout the conversation, like, hey, do you remember that you're bleeding out because you can't pay for the mortgage or the utilities, and it's been listed for 90 days, and so you can continue just iterating that over and over again. That's usually that does help with just being able to negotiate a bit more and get the price lower. So that was the only kind of, if we want to refer to a tactic or a strategy that we
Mhm.
had used during it, that would have been the number one strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. And you knocked it down to 570, 100 grand at that time, and then obviously then that was still contingent on an inspection. What did you guys find in the inspection that allowed you to take another 50 off?
Yeah. So unfortunately, but also it kind of worked out in the wash at the very end. We ended up finding that the property had originally been a 3-bedroom property. And then what the owners decided to do, and I'm pretty sure just based on the extent at which the renovation was not completed, they had just thrown up some drywall in the basement, some 2x4s, and created 3 extra bedrooms in the basement, which for us as an Airbnb investment is super helpful because we want our occupant or our guests, the amount of guests that we can have in to be more. So the 6-bedroom was a super high benefit for us when we were purchasing the property. However, the actual services to the property, being the septic number one, just did not actually suit the need of a 6-bedroom. So the septic's super small. It is not large enough for a 6-bedroom. And we actually had a septic inspection done, and it just showed that the septic was not large enough for the entire property. So now we basically came back and we said, hey, it's going to be 20 grand to do the septic over, and that was the number one kind of leverage point when it came down to it, was the septic being replaced.
Okay. So they basically added capacity without really expanding the infrastructure to support it. And that's
Exactly.
that's definitely something important to catch during the inspections. Okay, so now that you guys knocked it down and found all the things from then you moved ahead with closing. And then what was the process like from then to getting the property ready? Were you guys surprised by anything else that needed to be done, along that process?
Yeah, so once we actually had the property locked and closed, and we actually had our own keys, during the renovation, there were a few things that kind of stood out, but nothing that was really a curveball, let's say. We were ripping up the flooring, and there was some black mold on the flooring. So
Mm.
there's an easy way to make sure that that mold's gone. You kind of just bleach the floor and make sure that there's no moisture in the floor. It wasn't so rotten that we had to replace it, but there was just a few patches that we had uncovered there. And then, yeah, other than that, it's been about a month and a half worth of the renovation work on the inside of the property. Um, and yeah, they just done silly things. Like, here's a perfect example. The carpet was so gross. Like, they had just left the carpet go for years. That rather than replacing it, because they were kind of, I don't know, hard up on money or something, whatever was going on, they just decided to spray paint the entire carpet. So I've never heard of this before, but
What?
when we went in, they had spray painted the entire carpet. So now there's this blue like mist spray from like the sprayer when they're spraying the carpet that just went up the baseboards and onto the drywall.
Oh
So
my God, they didn't even cover
they
the
didn't cover
baseboard.
it. No, no.
Wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, that obviously needed to be ripped out and
So you can just
cleaned up.
imagine the state at which this property was in, if that's like how they treated it, I guess, to an extent. And then James was in the backyard working with the junk removers, and they uncovered pretty much an entire junk or
Landfill.
landfill. Yeah, it was like a whole like U-Haul worth of like landfill. It was just
It was
huge. Like,
just
it could have filled up
trash
an
on the
entire
property.
trailer. Yeah, they used it
Buried
as a dump
actually
site.
beneath
Yeah.
the backyard.
Wow. That's I mean that's not something that you normally come across.
Yeah.
So Oh, yeah, I want to take it. Sorry, I took one step back. Now, in terms of acquiring, did you guys do this, the acquisition all cash, or were you able to, did you find financing, for the acquisition? Or are you going to do that later?
Yeah, so we managed to get the property. So we did financing. We didn't buy it all cash, and we basically the one of the big components as well before actually buying the deal was doing our analysis and running the different scenarios and seeing like, okay, how well is what's the ROI going to look like if we
Mhm.
do 5% down, 20% down, 10% down, because we had actually some different options, and then we looked at the different mortgage rates. We did like a full analysis of kind of our worst case scenario, and then a more plausible, like realistic, we do well, and then also
Mhm.
it's the best case scenario. And we want to make sure with the deal that if it's even in a worst case scenario, that it's still going to be cash flowing positive and we're not going to be paying to carry the property out of our own
Yep.
pocket. And then we want to make sure that in a reasonable scenario that our ROI is hitting the targets that we want it to be, obviously.
Mhm.
And then a lot of that also is contingent not just on the revenue and and expenses, but also based on how you can actually structure the deal. So for us, like what we ended up doing is doing actually just over 5% down on the property, and ended up getting a really great interest rate, variable interest rate, because we're doing that cash out refinance. We're going to be refinancing in a year anyway.
Yep.
So we ended up getting just a crazy low interest rate for that first year, and then just putting a really small amount down, and then the majority of the money that we spent went into the renovation of the property.
Yeah, I think, especially if you're going in with the intention of refinancing, and you have a timeline where you're, even in the worst case, you're going to be done with everything, and starting to stabilize within a year. There's really no point in trying to look for a long-term fixed uh, interest financing in the beginning when you're going to refinance later. Anyways, you want to get the best deal. Now, 5% down, even on a variable, that's pretty good, in terms of the low percentage down payment. Those options may not be as available in other markets. So was it with a lender that you guys found locally, or is it like a private lender that you found?
Yeah, I actually, from my background in the multifamily space, I had connected with a pretty great mortgage broker out of Southwestern Ontario, and he works specifically with
Ah,
investors. And so he was able to secure a 5% down for us, and worked really well, like James mentioned there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, so the renovation process, 6 weeks. Sounds like it was some dirty work, digging up a lot of trash. But it doesn't seem like there was any kind of major structural renovations that you guys were doing. So it was relatively quick, right? Um, and what was the next step for you guys? Is furnishing the space, and how did you decide on what to do there?
Yeah, so that was the next step, is really just kind of going in and figuring out what amenities and furniture we want to add to the space and kind of planning that all out.
Mhm.
And that's something that a lot of people I think overlook it. A lot of people like overlook the importance of that aspect of it, because the way that you set your property up, the amenities you add, the way that you furnish the property, the way I like to look at it is like each piece I want to have a specific use case, a specific purpose for being there. I want to yield an ROI. I want to make the property a more desirable property for people staying at it, help me to have a leg up over the competition.
Mhm.
So a part of that was just the aesthetic, designing the inside and making sure that it was going to fit the aesthetic of what people are looking for. So for example, when they go up to a cottage and they're going for a getaway, the ultra modern, or like the gray flooring, gray walls is not a look that people are really interested in. Like people are more drawn to and interested in a kind of cozy cabin feel. So we did a lot of renovation work, like, and structured the way we did the interior decor and interior design in a way that it was going to ultimately still add value to the property, and we wanted to make sure that we were hitting that sort of checkbox there, but
Mhm.
also like kind of leveling that out with making the property really attractive to Airbnb guests. And so we thought pretty intentionally about each space and looked at like what are the things that we can do to make this a lot more attractive. So like one thing that we did in the renovation and furnishing period was rather than putting in a drop ceiling in the basement where there wasn't a finished ceiling, it's not a finished basement. Like typically if you're doing a renovation, you would think, okay, we'll finish the basement, we'll do a drop ceiling, or we'll drywall the ceiling off. And instead we looked and we were kind of looking around at different options. And one of the things that looks incredibly cool, is super unique, and offers like this really great attraction for Airbnb guests, is we actually ended up just staining the roof beams a nice dark brown, and then hanging some like Edison bulb lights, like a string of strung up lights. So it has this really, really cool, unique look down there.
Yeah.
It's just a super cool aesthetic. And there's all kinds of different areas where we kind of took that approach of doing the renovation and the interior furnishing and design in a unique way that gave us that sort of leg up. So another area that we focused a lot of our energy was what amenities are guests really looking for. And so the ideal guest going to that space is going to be, because it's a 6-bedroom, it's usually going to be either a family or a large group of friends that are getting away up there. So we leveraged that and we made it super attractive for those types of groups by adding things like, we've got all the different yard games under the sun. So like investing a couple $100 into spike ball, bocce ball, cornhole set, like all these different yard games, that makes it way more attractive. We've got a foosball table in the garage. So people like have all these activities that they can do when they're up there, that then when they're scrolling through the pictures on Airbnb and they're comparing different listings, it's literally just a couple $100 we spent on these things, but that's going to be one of the elements that draws people in. We also spent some money and got some kayaks and some bikes so people can go and do outdoor activities, because we're like, there's incredible hiking and biking trails right around us, and we're right by the lake, so people can go kayaking there. And then something that we spent a bit more money on was the addition of a hot tub and a sauna. And that was a big piece of that, is that this property is in an area that the cottage country area tends to be really attractive and do really well in the summertime. But there's a very distinct down season in the wintertime. And the biggest thing with down season that I remind people is that there are listings that get booked, but it's only the top 10 to 25% of listings that actually get booked. In the high season, if you have a pulse, if you have an Airbnb listing, you're going to get booked, because it's like everything, there's just more demand than there is supply. But in the wintertime, in the off season, you have to be one of those top listings that gets noticed in order to get the bookings, because there's way more supply than there is demand. And so we added some amenities like that, where we now expect that that's going to draw in a lot more people in the winter time and make it a much more attractive place, especially with the hot tub being something that you can actually filter for in your search results on Airbnb. So yeah, there's a lot of things like that just like really intentionally adding different amenities.
Yeah, that is something that this summer I actually just booked a space for a family trip, and my family was looking for something with a sauna. There weren't that many options, because just like they want to do a sauna. I'm like, it's summer, but they're like, all right, they still want to do a sauna. So filtering for it, I only found a few options, and for people who are looking for those amenities or features or appreciated, you just immediately become a finalist for them to compare against, and all the other activities, especially if you're going to be drawing family, for example, with young children, then you want to have some activities that are friendly for young children. So yeah, these are very intentional things that a lot of inexperienced or first-time hosts don't think about enough, and then they find out that they're wondering, why isn't their listing as competitive with their competitors? So
yeah.
Great. So are you going to be operating this as a single listing then, I assume, rather than individual units, right? Because it's meant for an entire group to book with.
Exactly. Yeah. The real draw to it is like a lot of a big portion of the draw is the privacy. Like it's got this big, beautiful backyard, and it's like a nice getaway property, nice, quiet, relaxing getaway. And there's honestly not a lot of demand for like single bedrooms or shared spaces up that way, because a lot of people are getting away in groups. And so it's very much an area where, like, if you buy in a downtown area, a lot of the time a 1-bedroom or a studio unit can do really well. But in the area that we're in specifically, the larger the unit is, honestly, like it's kind of to the point where like the more heads you can get in beds, the better your property is going to do.
Yeah.
Because you just have way less competition. There's so few places that can actually sleep 10 people. And that's what a lot of people are looking for.
Now I want to get look into the capacity, right? So you have 6 bedrooms. How many beds do you have in the unit now?
Yeah, so we ended up having what is it? We've got 9 beds total. So we've got 3 bedrooms that have queen beds, and then 3 other bedrooms that have 2 twin beds in each of them. So we've got 9 beds total. Sleeping accommodations for 12 if you were to put 2 people in each of the queens. And normally I recommend also adding pull-out couches so you can sleep more people there. And we certainly have the space to. We've got 2 large living rooms where you could have added pull-out couches as well. But one of the things you have to consider is bathrooms. You want to make sure that everyone can stay there comfortably. And so because we only actually have 2 bathrooms in this place,
Okay.
we actually are limiting the occupancy to 10 people, even though we can technically sleep 12 just on the beds alone. We're limiting it to start out with to 10 people, just because we want everyone to be able to stay there comfortably, and having 2 bathrooms shared between 12 people is a little bit much.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that I do see some large listings around where they they try to really max out the occupancy, and they'll put a bunk with a double, and then maybe like a bunk with a twin, or even 2 bunks in some bedrooms. And they might have 4 bedrooms, and they say that they can sleep 16. And it's a very different audience. Sometimes you can overdo that. And so you definitely don't want to overdo that if you have a big space and you want to up the capacity. But certainly for some of the rooms, putting more than 1 bed can help.
Yeah, it's something that you definitely want to do, because you want to get, especially like you have less competition when you can sleep more people, but you also, then people are looking at the price a different way. They're looking at what's the price if we split it amongst our friend group. Well, then it's a lot easier to justify, let's say $800 a night. But the other thing that you have to remember is that, like, if you can sleep 10 people versus if you can comfortably accommodate 10 people, there's a big difference there. And so one of the things I'm excited about with this property is that it can comfortably accommodate more, like it can sleep more people than it can comfortably accommodate, which usually it's the opposite, where you can sleep a lot more people than you can comfortably accommodate. So now if someone's comparing us to another listing that can sleep 10 people, this is a bedroom with a property with 9 beds that can sleep 10 people versus one with, 2 beds and some pull-out couches, and they're all in the same room kind of thing. It's a lot more comfortable to stay at our property with 10 guests than it is to stay at most of the other properties that allow for 10 guests.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when you do that, you also draw a more price-sensitive crowd. So they're going to be cramming together. You have a smaller space. Over time, you may get more wear and tear on the space. So you get too many people cramped up in the same space. Great. So then now that renovation's done, and where are you now in terms of getting the listing up and running and ramping it up?
Yeah, so we're in the final stages of getting it ready for photography right now. That's the next step, is we found a great professional photography company in that area that specializes specifically in Airbnbs. And that's a huge necessity, is you want to make sure you get really fantastic photos, because that's obviously one of the biggest factors that impacts your listing's performance long term. So then once the photo shoot is done, then it's just going to be listing it. And there's a May 2-4 weekend is a big, it's kind of the launch of cottage season in Canada, where it's finally nice enough out for people to justify, actually going out to a cottage. So it's like this big event. Everyone goes up to the cottage on May 2-4 long weekend. And so that's when our target launches, is to have everything ready for middle of next week, and then have the listing up and ready so it can actually get booked for the May 2-4 weekend.
And for your initial launch, are you going to be fairly aggressive with your pricing, or is the demand now in the space like high enough that you can launch even with a new listing at competitive rates?
Yeah. So with our pricing, we're going to, It's a little like we're going to be conservative, but it's still, that still ends up being quite aggressive because there's just so much demand right now. Like in the market that we're in, I'm confident that when we list this place, like I've been talking to other hosts, I've been watching the data as well. I've been seeing what places are getting booked for and like what the vacancy rates are. The vacancy rates are like pretty much nil. Like everything is getting booked up, especially for the weekends. Like you'll see the odd property that's overpriced on a Wednesday and stays vacant, but there's virtually nothing that's available for weekends. So we are going to come in and actually underprice the unit a little bit because one of the big factors with like when you first launch the listing, Airbnb obviously gives you initial boost of traffic. And if you fail to convert that traffic, then they sort of, the algorithm looks at your listing as being one that doesn't convert well. And so that hurts your search performance long term, compared to if we launch really well and we launch it and we take that initial traffic and get some really great conversion rates out of it, then we know that we're going to perform a lot better long-term in the search results. So we actually are going to be discounting the property slightly for those first few bookings that we initially get, just because we might give up a couple of dollars here and there on the front end, but then long term, making sure that our property actually shows up really high in the search rankings, that's going to more than pay for itself long term. So we are going to be discounting the property slightly, but that's still going to be some pretty high nightly rates because of just the state that the market's in right now.
Yeah, no, fair enough. In sort of regular market conditions, where the vacancies might be higher, kind of on average vacancies, new listings will have to be more conservative coming in just to make sure they get those metrics up early on. But it seems like you're in a place where there's practically zero vacancies, so you can definitely be more aggressive in that kind of situation. So looking ahead, you'll probably be stabilizing this listing, and over the next few months after it launches, what is next for you guys? Are you guys be looking at acquiring more properties like this, more cottages in the area? Are you guys be looking at some other markets?
Yeah, I think just from discussions with James and I, we're definitely looking to help more people, and we understand that there's a huge opportunity right now for Airbnbs just in 2021 alone, but also just in the future as well, like long term. It doesn't have to take COVID to make Airbnb great. I think it's just been great for quite some time, and we certainly want to help people that want to buy maybe their first Airbnb, or maybe they've done one already and it just hasn't gone that well, to learn how to actually invest in Airbnbs and go through everything that we've just gone through from start to finish, from being able to find the properties on or off market, learn how to analyze them, be able to negotiate like we had there too, and do counter offers and write up their own agreements to purchase the property if it's off market, and then teach them how to do the renovation. So managing the contractors, being able to find really good contractors that you can rely on, that are trustworthy, and then how to actually do the hosting too, like how to create the listing, how to get really good photos. Like James had mentioned, all those amenities that are very important. Making sure that you're able to customize the listing to actually fit the amenities that make the most sense. And then teaching them also how to do the bookkeeping. Like that's kind of the ongoing task that we'll have now, is the administration of the property, making sure, we have cash flow documents monthly done, profit and loss statements, that the bookkeeping is done properly, because it is a business, and the CRA in Canada or the RRA in America there, they're going to look at this thing as a business. So it has to operate like one. And, that's something that quite a few people I find kind of forget about going into it. But there is a good amount of work to be done when it comes to the bookkeeping of the property too.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is both of you have such an extensive background in short-term rentals and real estate, managing properties prior to doing this project, that you're bringing an expertise and a process from start to finish that those people who are interested, and especially if they're not familiar and they don't have the background, they're going to be making a lot of mistakes. They're going to not know what they don't know that they should be doing all along, the way in the process. So I'm assuming the folks that you're going to be helping, they're going to essentially have your playbook, right? They're going to be able to know exactly what they need to do, all the little check boxes that they got to check into. There's nothing that they'll miss along the way if they're trying to replicate your model in wherever market that they're at.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I was saying to Riley, even like negotiating a real estate deal is not something that I have a lot of experience with. And it was honestly Riley who spearheaded that, and really kind of took control on that aspect of the deal. And I was saying to him, like, even just that one aspect was literally worth like him being able to do that. It was the difference. I mean, like at the end of the day, it was $150,000 skill set
Yeah.
that Riley deployed there. And it was also the difference between this deal making sense and not making sense financially. So it's like that, like even just one little mistake there is either going to cost you over $100,000 or get you into a deal that ultimately doesn't make sense, or prohibit you from getting into a deal that does make sense and have you just sitting on the sidelines with it. So yeah, that's where like, even for me working with Riley's expertise and obviously Riley working with my expertise of being able to set everything up and optimize it, it's like it really, it's a difference maker in terms of actually getting in and getting in the right way and making it actually work, as opposed to getting into the wrong deal and having it go south.
Yeah, I think the whole process, look, all the little things in terms of finding the right kind of financing structure as well. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and negotiating it, all of that certainly makes it can move the needle from a deal that barely pencils and maybe barely works to a deal from what it looks like it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
And moving that needle from there to there certainly takes intention and certainly takes some the knowledge in terms of knowing what you're doing here. So for people that are interested, they want to do something like this and they want your help, you know, how should they find you guys?
Yeah, so we can be reached out to on Instagram. So I guess my handle, it's Riley Oickle, investor. So you can reach out to me there on Instagram or on Facebook. More than happy to help and kind of explain what we had done here even more in detail. If you have any specific questions around Airbnb investment, feel free to reach out there. And then James, you also.
Yeah. So people can find me on Instagram as well, or on Facebook. Just James Svetec. Last name is Svetec. And then if people are actually interested, if there's people that are interested in investing in short-term rentals and want to work directly with Riley and I, then the best step is just to kind of get in touch. They can actually go to BNB Mastery Program, bnbmasteryprogram.com/book a call. And they can actually just book a call directly with me, and we can jump on the phone for a quick chat, kind of talk about what their situation is, what their goals are, and see if it makes sense for us to help them and kind of work really closely with them to help walk them through the whole process. So yeah, people are interested in reaching out to us and getting in touch and want to work together and kind of start investing in short-term rentals, then that's probably the best way. It's just to go to bnbmasteryprogram.com/book a call and set up a time in my calendar.
Yeah, no, you know, right now, I just want to say that anybody who's listening right now, if you're actually seriously thinking about doing an Airbnb business, doing short-term rentals, you know, right now we're kind of in that transition, sort of the calm before the storm of massive demand, with you know, markets and countries starting to open up, and all of this pent-up demand from people who have delayed their vacations, delayed their you know, spending on leisure. There's going to just be a massive, massive influx of people wanting to book vacations, still getting away from cities, and you know, people who get started earlier are gonna have listings that have more reviews, better ratings, that are more established, and when the demand hits first, they're gonna benefit first. So awesome. Well, you know, I want to just kind of wrap this up and, you know, ask you guys, is there anything else that you want to share that, you know, I didn't ask, and that you want the listeners who are here tuning in to know about?
Yeah, I think just that, like exactly like you said, like it's just such a great opportunity right now with investing in short-term rentals that I would encourage anyone who has kind of been sitting on the fence and thinking about getting started with short-term rentals, to you know, reach out, jump on a call with us. I'd be happy to talk more, because it's a really, really interesting time. And Riley and I are really passionate about helping people right now to get started investing more into short-term rentals. It's going to be a big focus for us over the next 12 months here. So yeah, if you're interested in it all, I'd love to chat and just, yeah, reach out.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.